John Lowry, you're donating so soon. 99 cents. You know there's no refunds. But thank you for the donation. Who's here first? Dave Spirals. Yes, hello, you're number one. Numero uno. Eins. It doesn't sound good in French for one. 1,000 Pine points to you. Worldview Detective. Good to see you here again. 500 Pine points for you. Richard Garrison. Is that a new name to me? Maybe. 250 Pine points to you. Hopeful Agnostic. You're hopeful for nothing. No Pine points for you because you're not good enough. Why can't you be like Richard? Or why can't you be more like Dave Spirals or Worldview Detective? I don't get it. Welcome. This will be a call-in show. If theists want to call in, I'm targeting Christians again, I guess, because I'm playing some Christian videos here. I want to actually start with the mic drop one. And the question on the table is, do you think you're using Jesus as a self-help tool, number one? And that's in theme with this video. And the second question on the table is, how do you deal with the malevolent, misogynistic, sadomasochist bully of Yahweh in the Old Testament? I know if you're a Christian, you don't view God that way, Jesus that way, but I'm curious to know what defense you take to those who make those accusations. And then if someone calls in, actually, there's two people who I wouldn't mind calling in. Ask Cliff, if you're watching, you can call in. And Dry Apologist, if you want to call in, because I remember you wanted to talk to me about something, then I'll stop. This is the first video, is a short one. Adam Albilia, say hi. I'm here with my Jewish sister. Hi, Adam. Hi, Jewish sister. Welcome to the show.
Reading books like Fierce, Free, and Full of Fire by Jen Hatmaker, Untamed by Glennon Doyle, The Girl Wash Your Face, Rachel Hollis. And because I critique these books and I review these books. And what you've just said is literally the opposite of the advice that these women are giving in these books.
I got to do fancy stuff like that.
Rachel Hollis says, your goal is to be the hero of your own story. Put yourself first. Jen Hatmaker will walk you through all kinds of different sociological things.
Okay, I don't know who Jen Hatmaker is, but I guess these two Christian women don't like this person because it's too self-help. The Urdu Free Thinker, thank you for the donation. Keep doing what you're doing, challenging the Abrahamic God, Yahweh Allah. Well, I do challenge that God particularly, but I'm all for challenging all gods, except the God of my own life, which is me, right?
Things you can do, personality tests, all kinds of stuff you can do to be enough for yourself. That's the message that these women are giving, and you are giving, thankfully. And
by the way, I've invited Alisa Childers on my show a long time ago. And Alisa, you're still welcome to come on my show, but I realize that you have everything to lose, nothing to gain, so I don't blame you for not coming.
Thank God for you. You are giving the exact opposite, almost shockingly opposite answer. You're saying, no, the opposite is true. You have to realize how not enough you are. But then you say, but that's the start of the good news. Expand on that a little bit.
Yes, and so everyone that you just listed, in addition to, I would say, people like Brene Brown and other kind of influencers, they all have very similar self-empowerment messages. And people ask me all the time, how did this become so popular? Because
Okay, this is what I want you to, if you're a Christian listening, this is, I think, what I want you to think about while listening to these two. This whole idea of self-empowerment, really, how would you articulate the difference between what some of these self-help gurus are advocating and what you're doing by putting your trust in Jesus? Now, I know to you that, but it's like completely different. I understand, but how would you articulate how it's completely different?
Feels good. We are instinctively, I think, compelled to be our own gods and to self-worship. See, they have a different mentality than Christianity does about the natural state of human beings, whereas they kind of argue, either implicitly or explicitly, that deep down we are really good, that deep down there is this hidden goddess inside of us, and it's just societal
I'm starting to wonder, maybe there's a hidden goddess inside of me.
norms and bad church experiences and other people's opinions that are holding our real awesome goddess self back. But once you dig down there with personality tests and all that different stuff and reading my book, then you'll finally be able to unleash that perfect goddess, and you'll be able to manifest all of these good things in your life. Whereas Christianity says, no, actually, even though, yes, you're so valuable and you're made in the image of God, you have a soul that's going to live forever.
You're so valuable. You're made in the image of God, but...
And obviously you matter because God sent his own son to die for you. But the reason that
there's the but the reason
he died for you is because you're not good deep down. You do not have this inner goddess waiting to be unleashed.
You're not good deep down. You know, in times like this, can I, let's see, cute baby pictures. Would it be bad for me? I don't know if these are copyright free though. Images may be subject to copyright. Yeah, I better not. But just imagine, if you would, the sweetest, cutest little baby in the world. And then while you're imagining that sweet, cute little baby, imagine this woman, what's her name? Allie, saying this.
Because God sent his own son to die for you. But the reason that he died for you is because you're not good deep down. You do not have this inner goddess waiting to be unleashed.
So, Christian mothers with little ones, hold your child in your arms. And even if they might not understand you, look into their eyes and say, you're not good deep down.
Who you are on the inside is corrupt and depraved and has to not just be improved, but made new by Christ and made new by the Holy Spirit. And so they are two very disparate views of the nature of human beings. That
See, this is where I would disagree. I think the reason why the self-help gurus do what they do is they realize that people are flawed, they have mistakes, but they can also overcome them. They can do things to better their lives. And I think that's exactly what Christians like you two do. You make mistakes, you have faults, but you can do things to better your life. And one of those things, I think you would say, is to put freely your trust in Jesus, right? Jesus is your self-help tool.
We're seeing from the Jen Hatmaker, Rachel Hollis crowd, and that we see in Christianity. And I think that is what's causing a lot of the confusion in people that are looking at those two conflicting messages. And I think that is also part of why they are so appealing, because in our self-righteousness, which is natural, and in our arrogance, in our pride, we don't want to believe that deep down we are bad. We don't want to believe that we need saving.
See, this is the key with Christianity. What use is Jesus if you don't need him? Like, you gotta push yourself down. You gotta say you're terrible. And Christianity goes further than that, because there's a spectrum of behaviors on this planet that us human beings say, this is atrocious and this is not so bad, and this is really good. But the key selling point for this version of Christianity is, no, even at your best, think of the best human being you know morally, as far as behavior with their fellow man, fellow woman, that's still not good enough. Gosh darn it, you're just not good enough.
We don't want to believe that we are imperfect and need to be made.
Sorry for my potty mouth.
New. We want to believe exactly what Satan told Eve in the garden, that you actually can
believe what Satan told Eve in the garden. You are aware that Adam and Eve never existed, right, Allie Beth? Alisa Childers, you are aware that Adam and Eve, as depicted in the story of Genesis, never existed, right? Tell me you don't believe that.
have the power of God if you just do this thing. If you just listen to me, God just doesn't want you to be as powerful. It is the same lie that has been recycled and repackaged by these women who are saying if you just do these things, then you will have the power to basically be your own God. And the irony is,
yeah, there is irony here, but the irony I'm seeing is different than the irony you are seeing. Aren't you being the God, your own God of your life, Allie and Alisa, when you choose to put your trust in Jesus? Haven't you become your own God when you make Jesus the center of your self-help tools?
is that they are saying you're perfect the way you are, you're enough the way you are, you're empowered and fulfilled in yourself, but oh, by the way, you need to read my book to really get there. Oh,
here's more irony. Oh, by the way, you need to read my book. Alisa has just published a book on identifying what is it, counterfeit the gospel, the progressive Christianity, all these things. How many books, Christian ladies listening right now, how many books have you bought on things like finding the will of God, prayer, how to teach your kids to be Christians, or how to raise godly children? Like, aren't those self-help books? Right? Like, if you're saying all you need is Jesus, my goodness, stop buying apologetic books. Stop buying all these books on how to be a better warrior for Christ and a prayer warrior, and how to raise your children in the Lord. All you need is Jesus. Don't try it on your own by buying these books and reading them to improve your lives. All you need is Jesus is the answer.
you need to take this personality test to really get there. You need to,
Power of a Praying Wife, says Aaron. Yes. Yes. All these self-help books. You just put a Christian label on it and you think, oh, this makes it okay. What about Bible college? There's like the ultimate self-help right there, right? Not only do you go there to find a spouse, but, if all you need is Jesus and the Bible, of course, then you don't need no stinking Bible college. So, some Christians are agreeing with me here, and other Christians are like, I'm out of here. This PineCreek is full of it.
Do my entrepreneurial workbook to really get there. Well, if you were enough, if inside you had all the tools that you needed to be happy.
I'm good enough. I'm strong enough. I'm good looking enough. And gosh darn it, people love me.
To be fulfilled, you wouldn't need to read their books. You wouldn't need to follow their programs. You wouldn't need to repeat their mantras or take their personality test. You would have it all inside of you already. But they're actually saying, while they're simultaneously selling books by telling you you're all you need, they're saying you need me. You also need me. You also need my wisdom. That's how they make their money. And so it's a paradox, and it's a lie.
You need to buy Alisa's book so you can identify the true gospel from the false one. You need Alisa's book. Please buy it now. It's in bookstores near you, because the Bible is not enough. Jesus is not enough. There's false teachers out there, and people like Alisa can help you, self-help you.
Really, it's a lie. And the truth is much more freeing, and this is what your question was about. The truth is that we get to recognize that we're actually not enough, that God made us not enough. He made us not just with the capacity to sin, but he made us, let me rephrase that.
Whoa, she needs to rephrase something. That tells me she said something wrong. I got to focus now.
This is what your question was about. The truth is that we get to recognize that we're actually not enough, that God made us not enough.
Oh, that's what she didn't like. Her ears and her mouth weren't in sabbatical. Did you guys catch that?
We get to recognize that we're actually not enough, that God made us not enough.
God made us not enough. Did God make Adam and Eve not enough? See, this is the truth in memes. In fact, let's see if I can find that meme. How does that meme go? God Don't you love the sound of typing? Let's see if I can find it. There's not a good one. But you know the meme I'm talking about, right? God created people sick and then commanded them to be well. She's saying the exact same thing here. That meme is not lying, according to Allie Stuckey. Hey, thank you, B.O. Wolf, for the donation. God made us not enough for what? His own plans? Exactly.
He made us not just with the capacity to sin, but he made us. Well, let me rephrase that. He made us in need of redemption, and
he made us needy. Why would God make humans needy? Because God himself is needy. See, humans are made in the image of God. Humans are needy. Therefore, God is needy. And that's why God created, because he saw in his omniscience what would happen. And he saw there would be sin and suffering and pain and hell and all those problems, natural disasters, animals killing other animals and so forth. But he was okay with it. Why? Because God is needy. I need people to need me.
He made us in need of salvation, but not just that, also sanctification and also strength. There is nowhere in the Bible where you will find a story of man's sufficiency. The entirety of the biblical
What about Jesus?
narrative is about Christ's sufficiency, God's sufficiency, and our utter dependency, our utter need for him, our utter insufficiency and inadequacy, and our inability to save ourselves. And that is
your inability to save yourselves. Now, unless Allie Stuckey is a Calvinist, she may need to rephrase that as well. Allie Stuckey, do you want a mulligan on this?
Inadequacy and our inability to save ourselves.
You don't have the ability to choose Christ? Say it's not so. Have I found another female Calvinist? I thought Alisa was not a Calvinist, and so therefore she would only have non-Calvinists on her show. But it sounds like this Allie Stuckey person saying, no, you don't even have the ability to save yourself. But I thought you could freely choose the gift of salvation and confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord and have salvation and go have eternal life. Sounds like Allie says you can't even do that. Maybe she is a Calvinist. And if she is, I definitely want to interview you, Allie Stuckey.
And that is
Marcel in the live stream chat says PineCreek, she is a Calvinist. She is? Is Alisa Childers a Calvinist as well? This is getting interesting. Because I got the impression Alisa was not a Calvinist. And if she is, like, I wonder if this thought even entered Alisa's mind when she heard this. You don't even have the ability to choose Christ. Hey, thank you for the donation, Dean L. Gooch. 6942. Thank you for the generous donation of $20. Ex-Muslim here. Huge fan of your content. Thank you for many hours of thought-provoking entertainment. Dean, well, thank you very much for the donation. I'm glad to do it. I'm having fun.
Much more, it might sound self-deprecating, but it's much more free.
It might sound self-deprecating? No, it does. It definitely sounds self-deprecating. To say that there's nothing good in you, and you're saying that you can't even... It's good to choose Christ as the center of your life, is it not? It's sounding like you can't even do that. So maybe, wow, kudos to you if you're a consistent Calvinist.
To realize I don't have to rely on my sufficiency or the 10.
Okay, this is where the self-help comes in. Allie Stuckey, this is where you're admitting you're weak. It's like, I can't take the pressure of life. I got kids, I got a husband, I got work, I got this, I got that, I got other ladies gossiping about me and blah, 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 blah. And if I just put it all on the lap of Jesus, oh, that sounds bad. If I give it all to Jesus, it just, I can breathe. But isn't that kind of shirking your responsibilities, Allie? It's like, isn't this just a way to self-medicate instead of using alcohol, instead of using drugs, instead of going to therapy 5 times a week, instead of eating cheesecake or pizza and sitting down and watching Days of Our Lives? There's some stereotyping there. Aren't you just using Jesus instead as your self-help medication? Because you can just say, oh, I got all these worries in my life and I just cast it Jesus's way, so I don't have to worry about it.
Motivating mantras that I repeat in the morning, or reading some book to finally make me feel fulfilled. Or if your life was a journey to find your inner goddess, how exhausting would that be?
Yeah, how exhausting would that be? How exhausting is it to be a Christian? How exhausting is it to be a Christian woman of this version of Christianity? How exhausting is it knowing that you have to be submissive to your husband, obey your husband in some translations? How exhausting is it to know that you have to shut up in church and not say anything that actually could be true to a man because you're not allowed to have authority or teach men in the church? How exhausting is it when you see, I don't know, your husband teaching your children the wrong way spiritually or whatever, in your opinion? You just got to sit there and wait till he's done, and because he's the head of the home, right? How exhausting is it when you think you know the will of God and yet it seems like you didn't? How exhausting is it when you think you have this prayer life and you set goals to pray and read the word more, and you just find you just fall short of that goal time and time again? How exhausting is it when you have this thought life that you're struggling with, and it seems like you always go back to it and you have to repent over and over again? How exhausting is this, Allie Stuckey? Is there any Christians listening right now that's resonating with what I'm saying? Because I've been there. I know how exhausting Christianity can be. It's terrible. Now, I think, to be fair, there's moments where you can just cast all your problems on Jesus and it goes away like it's sinking in quicksand. Yeah, I'll give you there's moments like that. But usually that's the moments you feel closest to Jesus when you're the most desperate, right? How sad is that? That when you feel you have this relationship is in your deepest, dire most times. How many memes do you have up on your wall, Allie Stuckey and Alisa Childers, of running the good race, staying strong, for me and my house we will serve the Lord? Constant reminders in order so you do not fail or make Yahweh frown, Jesus frown. Yeah, it's exhausting.
When really, you get to turn your eyes to Jesus, who is our sufficiency, who says that my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Well, the burden of the God of self is very heavy, and its yoke is very difficult. And so the good news is that we don't have to depend on our enoughness, but Christ's enoughness, which doesn't change.
Oh, I didn't understand what she said, but she's saying enoughness.
Based on our opinions of ourselves or our circumstances.
Man, if I had a microphone in my hand, I would just drop it right there.
Yeah, if I had a microphone in my hand, well, I kind of do, but I don't want to drop it. Okay, if you're a Christian woman listening right now, I would love it if you would call in and tell me if I'm wrong or right. If I said anything that you agree with, tell me what you disagreed with. Because I know with a capital K that Christians struggle. It's not easy being a Christian. I get that. Why is she saying enoughness? It's kind of catchy though. Enoughness. Okay, so that's question one on the table. Is Jesus your self-help tool? Are you using Jesus to help lower your anxieties, to help lower your depressions, to help give you meaning, hope, meaning, and purpose? And if you are, how is that any different than any self-help book? That's my question to you, Christians, not just female Christians, but male Christians as well. And if I'm right that you're using Jesus as a self-help tool, like how is that any different than Heroin. I guess it's cheaper than heroin. Well, maybe it's not cheaper. It comes with a cost. Okay, so the second question on the table is how I think I know the answer to most questions I ask, but there's several ways it can go. But I want to really know how Christians deal with the Jesus of the Old Testament. Notice I said Jesus of the Old Testament. So this is to Trinitarians. How they reconcile this really terrible person, Yahweh in the Trinity. What excuses do you guys come up with?
It seems to come across to me from his book, The God Delusion, that
this is unbelievable. This is Dan Barker versus Martin Kuhrt. This was just published December 4th.
Is harder on the God of the Old Testament. He's a bit more respectful towards Jesus, even calling him quite progressive.
They're talking about Richard Dawkins, and they're almost implying that he's what's the word? Anti-Semitic here, which is just nuts
for a man of his time. And although that can sound very condescending to Christians, he does seem particularly to home in on the Old Testament. And of course, I think it's fair to say that in the history of the world and of the church, very sadly.
Thank you, Ela Chess. I think Christians are encouraged to use Jesus as self-help. 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast all your anxiety on him, all your cares on him, because he cares for you. Yeah, the scriptures itself is saying Jesus is your self-help tool. It's very practical.
There has been a lot of anti-Semitism, and a lot of Christians or people who identify themselves as Christians don't really understand the Jewish roots of the Christian faith, and that God, the God of the Old Testament, is the same as the God of the New Testament.
This is important. The God of the Old Testament is the same as the God in the New Testament. This needs to get out more to Christians, because there's a lot of Christians who, if they truly come to believe that, they'll leave Christianity.
And this is actually where I agree with Dan. I believe that Jesus was thoroughly identified with his heavenly Father, and that the Bible that Jesus read were the Hebrew scriptures, and Jesus believed every word of them. And
yeah, Jesus believed. I ask this question often as the time machine thought experiment. If we could go back in time, talk to Jesus, and ask him what he thought about the commandments that Yahweh gave, for example, to slaughter the Canaanites, do you think Jesus would say, yeah, that was me. That was me and God and the Holy Spirit, us oneness. We did that, yeah. What's your question is what? Dave Spirals says something profound. Thank you for the donation, Dave Spirals. We can accept God creating man to save man, but we cannot accept man creating God to save himself. Why is that, I wonder? Is this like a type of, what's the word? Insincere humility?
And constantly said so. It is written. It is written. So here there's a point of agreement between Dan Barker and me that you can't.
Okay, what's the point of agreement between these two guys? Dan Barker's the guy, the former Christian, former pastor, now atheist. What's the agreement? The agreement is the God of the New Testament, according to at least this version of Christianity, is the God of the Old Testament. Old Testament, New Testament, same God. So all you flag-waving phony Christians out there said, my God didn't say such and such. My God didn't do such and such. My God is Jesus, and he likes to having children on his knee and bouncing up and down, and he would never hurt a child. But in the Old Testament, Jesus killed children. Let me say that again for the Christians in Alabama. In the Old Testament, Jesus killed children, infants, babies.
Say, well, the Old Testament, yes, it's all very horrible and bloodthirsty, but don't worry, that was a nasty, bigoted, Jewish, sectarian kind of God. Whereas, of course, now we have Jesus, and God's had a bit of a makeover, and he's become a Christian.
Yeah, well, I heard someone say God settled down, he cooled off after the birth of his first child.
So we can temper bad stuff in the Old Testament by saying, along comes Jesus.
Pablo Henriksen Pablo says, it is the same God, Doug, but the way people related to him in the Old Testament was different than now. Okay, well, what I want to know, what all atheists want to know, is what is God like? Describe God to us. Would he ever hurt a child? Yes or no? Does love sometimes entail slaughtering infants? Is that the nature of your deity or not? I don't know, Pablo, if you're a Christian or not, but these are questions, burning questions that demand explanation.
And he shows us that
Sure.
God isn't like that at all.
Well, at least
lovely.
that's one point of agreement. There may not be many more going forward in the rest of the show, but let's see. We're biting off an awful lot. I mean, we're only looking at 3 of these particular characteristics on the show today. I've already mentioned them: capriciously malevolent, misogynistic, sadomasochistic. But that will give us more than enough.
By the way, my apologies. Oh, I'm so stupid. Satan, why didn't you remind me of this? You guys need this. Anybody who wants to call in, it's whereby.com/PineCreek. And if you type that into your browser, either on your phone or your desktop computer, your mainframe IBM computer in your basement, whatever, you type that in and you'll get me, and we can talk. And even if you don't want to be audible, I'm almost willing to having a, what do you call this? A secluded one-on-one via text. I can show your text what you type if you prefer not to be heard or seen. But I prefer you seen, second audible at least, third type.
To go with for the remainder of our time, gentlemen. So why don't we dive straight in to the first one, capriciously malevolent. Now, what I suggest we do, Dan, is you just give a brief sketch of why you believe this, just a couple of minutes, if you would, and then we'll see what some specific issues are that Martin had with that particular chapter.
Is what's his name? Justin Brierley? Is he oranger? He looks a bit like Trump today.
So tell us about that.
So I want to say that I did order your book, Martin. It just came
there
a
it
few
is.
days ago. So you have one sale, at least, you know that.
That's great.
And I appreciate your writing style. You're very eloquent, you're very articulate, and you're very passionate about what you believe. And you do raise some good points, and I appreciate those points, because my book could not put everything into it, obviously. And when you're talking about 1,500 passages.
Is that a devil catcher in the background? Or what do you call those things in Native American culture? It's like to catch evil spirits?
2 stories. And in your book, Martin, you talk about the Job story, but you ignore the Samson one, which I think is a much more interesting story. It's more like a dark action comic hero book. You know what I mean? It's like a absolutely incredible story. But Job, in the book of Job.
Yes, Dan Barker is looking a little old. You know, we all get older at the same rate, but I just have 3 words for Dan Barker: just for men.
I think has no redeeming moral features at all. I don't see why anyone would admire that book at all. We have God himself in his own words.
Okay, Kate, Christians, are you listening? Listen up. I know you were daydreaming, you're typing and stuff, and your kids are crying, and you, I don't know what else you're doing. But listen up. My question to you is, what do you disagree with what Dan Barker is about to say? Really focus and grab onto a nugget that Dan Barker is about to say and say, this is what I disagree with. Please. I want to know what the this is.
Admitting that he tortured and destroyed an innocent person for no reason. Job chapter 2, verse 3, I think that is. And Martin, you do a pretty good job of delineating some of the problems with the problem of suffering, the problem of evil, which is something we're struggling with right now. But I think you miss a point. The book of Job is not about the problem of suffering or the problem of evil in the way we think of it today, natural evil versus moral evil, those 2 different evils. The book of Job is about the problem of supernatural evil. It's about God himself being evil. It's not about hurricanes.
Okay, my guess is you're going to disagree with that, but listen on.
Or floods or viruses.
That's a conclusion. But what actually happened, I want to know from Christians, what do you disagree with?
Or pandemics or criminals. It's about the actions of God himself. And Satan went to God and said, you've got a servant there named Job. He's faithful, but he only loves you because you're protecting him. You take away the fence and he will stop loving you.
Satan, is that true? Did you actually go to God and ask and say these things about Job? You did. Why would you do that? It was fun. Ugh. This is my boss. This is who I work for.
And God said, you're on, go for it. And so then, of course, Satan could not act without God's permission. And so then Satan did that. He came back again. And let me just read the verse. I'll read it here. The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still persists in his integrity, although you, Satan, incited me against him to destroy him for no reason. And you ignore that sentence.
Yeah, it says in Job, for no reason. Is that true? Fun is not a reason.
In your book, Martin, you ignore that whole point of God's actions himself being evil. If you and I were to do that, if you and I were to barge into some loving Christian's home and say, you kids, you only love your dad because he's protecting you. And the dad were to say, all right, come in the house and do what you will. And suppose some pedophile were to start harming and molesting and killing the pets and raping the children while the dad sits outside looking in. I hope they still love me. I hope they still love me. What would you think of such a monster? Who's the real criminal here? That's the issue in God being capricious.
Okay, well, Christians listening, do you disagree with that? That at least on the human level, that would be a monster? I'm a father. What would you think of me if I let a pedophile in and said, do what you want with my kids? What would you think of me? Be honest. You think I'm a horrible father, right? Why isn't Yahweh a horrible father then? There's some people who know what I'm about to say. There's an answer to that question, and it's 2 words. I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. Maybe I'll go, category error. Yeah, isn't that what some of you precepts will say to me?
Graciously malevolent. It's not about the traditional philosophical problem of evil. It's about the actual character of God himself.
Well, let's go to Martin and hear his defense at this point. Obviously, many people do differ from Dan here and believe that Job is, a preeminent example, the oldest book in the Bible, this literature that deals, one of the earliest pieces of literature dealing with the problem of suffering and evil.
Now, I want you, so here's the problem at hand. Here's the issue. Yahweh's a schmuck because he said, for no reason, go ahead and do what you want with my servant Job. Now, let's listen to the Christian on trying to explain why that's not bad. I want you to listen really closely, see if he actually gives a reason why it's not bad.
What's your view, Martin, and how do you respond to this charge?
Well, the book of Job is part of the Jewish wisdom literature, and it's very philosophical. I think it does speak to philosophical issues, but I think even more, it speaks to the mystery of innocent suffering. And Job may or may not have been a historical person, but there's certainly plenty of Jobs in the world today. And
okay. Now this is interesting. If it were me, and if I could interrupt, I would ask this Martin Kuhrt guy and every Christian listening, I want a 1-word answer. Yes or no. Do you believe Job existed in history? Yes or no. Got to nail that down first. And if they say, I don't know, then I guess that's another option. If you don't know, you don't know. But no, I'm asking a belief question, not a knowledge question. What's your gut tell you? What's your intuitions tell you? Is this a guy from history? Do you trust that Job is a historical narrative at all? That's number 1. Did Job exist? Number 2, Christians, do you believe that Satan exists? Yes or no? Do you believe Yahweh exists? Of course, you're going to say yes to that one. Now, do you believe that Satan went up to Yahweh and talked about Job and what Satan can do to Job? Do you believe that? Yes or no? Lean yes, lean no. You got to get those things right on the table right away, because that stops all the fart noises coming out of this guy's mouth now. I'm calling it fart noises, but it's like, well, there's mysteries with the book of Job, blah, 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 blah. No, the claim is, if this happened in history, God's a schmuck. Do you believe this happened in history? Now, this is one answer the Christian could give. This is just a story. It never happened in history. Okay, and if that's your answer, then you say something like, well, do you think that the story that did not happen in history in any way reflects who your God is? That's the tougher question, right? Because if they say yes, then they still worship a schmuck, even though it never happened in history, because it's a story that reflects who this God is. If they say no, then basically you're talking to a Marcionite type Christian who just rejects all the Old Testament, but this guy doesn't.
Been plenty of people who suffer the most terrible things. They're good people, and they don't deserve what is happening to them. And of course, if you believe that God is all-powerful, as Christians do, and as the Bible says, it's interesting that Dan mentioned the fact that Satan knew he couldn't do anything to Job without God's permission, license, and that's true.
Does that hold to everything? Like, there's a lot of Christians who believe in spiritual warfare, spiritual battles. Satan needed God's permission to inflict harm on Job. Does Satan need God's permission to tempt you 20-year-old male Christians with porn? Like, does Satan go to God every time? You see... whose name should I use? You see Christian Myron down there? Yeah, he struggles with lust. God, do I have your permission to tempt him with porn? And God says, yeah, sure, why not? He's a faithful servant. He'll say no to you, Satan. Is that how it works every time, just like it happened with Job? Or is Job a special case?
In the book, so if you believe God is all-powerful and all-loving, then the problem of suffering, the theodicy, that why did bad things happen to good people, that is a particularly Judeo-Christian question and problem. I mean, atheists will just say it's bad luck that good people suffer. There's no reason. It's ultimately absurd.
What does any of this have to do with the text?
About life. There's the doctrine of karma, which says that bad things happen to you. You've either been bad in this life or a previous life.
Did God say these things or not?
Say, well,
and if he did, how do you justify that in your mind? All this bad things happen to good people. This is a story. This is a mystery of pain and suffering and evil. That's not the issue. The issue is, did God allow Satan to do this or not? And if he did, how do you live with yourself if you worship him?
The answer to suffering is just to get rid of all desires, and then you won't be disappointed. Whereas it's only really Christians that have to face this really hard question of, if there's a really good, loving God who is all-powerful, then why do bad things happen to good people? And for that, when Dan says that actually there's
bad things, that's an understatement to the story of Job. What happened to Job?
There's nothing there at all that is inspiring or points to any sort of redeeming value. I mean, I say in my book, actually, I think there are lots of moral lessons and spiritual truths that.
Yeah, this is like so frustrating, because these are just moral lessons, spiritual truths on what? On a poor guy getting his whole life ruined because of a bet between Satan, a story of a bet between Satan and Yahweh. Like, if you don't believe this happened in history, just say so. Just say it's just a story, Dan Barker. Relax, chill out. This didn't happen. This is not a reflection of the God I worship and serve at all. But see, Christians like this, and maybe I'm wrong, and he will say this, but Christians like this, they can't do that. They don't have the gonads to do it. They don't have the backbone to do it, because it sets up a whole new line of implications that they don't want to have to deal with. Now we got, okay, well, it sure reads as historical, but it's not. And so maybe the resurrection reads as historical and it's not. And well, we can't go that far. And so now we got a big problem in our hands. In other words, he's kowtowing to the inerrantists in the crowd.
Can be drawn from the book of Job. But perhaps the biggest thing is, there is the poetry, and Alfred Lord Tennyson, who wrote my favourite poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade, which my grandfather used to read to me, he said what wonderful poetry the book of Job is. But perhaps more than that, I think it's deeply therapeutic for anyone who is suffering
Oh, yeah. This is sick. This is, well, it's true, but it's sick. Because he's basically saying, okay, Christians out there whose life sucks, just look at the story of Job and you'll feel better. At least your life doesn't suck that bad. That's basically what he's saying here. But he's right.
Of course, people are suffering a lot in the world today through the pandemic and through all sorts of things. And depression is a real issue. And I think for anyone who struggles with depression, reading the book of Job, I think they'd be struck by, gosh, this guy is feeling the way I feel. He's pouring out in the most...
Yeah, a Christian who's suffering from depression. This guy's going through what I'm going through, sort of. And God said to Satan to do it. And yet I worship this God every Sunday morning between the hours of 10 and noon.
His searingly honest way, his feelings about life and about what's happened, about his relationship with God and with other people. I think this book is valuable just for its sheer honesty.
Okay, so just on that level, you think it has a value in terms of the literary quality, the philosophical questions?
Okay, this is where I left off when I was previewing this. I do not know how Dan Barker comes back on him, but if I were Dan Barker, I would press him hard. Do you think this happened in history? If yes, is this a reflection of the character and nature of your God? And if yes, how do you live with yourself? Why do you worship this God? Is there anything this God could say, do, will, decree that you would say, enough, you no longer have my worship? And if that's the case, why are you so scared of hell that you just have to do it no matter what? Because you're a good slave.
The way it has brought comfort.
I'm right. Is there something in this water? I'm a little too punchy today.
In the sense to people knowing that voice has been expressed. Obviously, Dan's main issue, though, when it comes to God, is that it seems to paint God as this capriciously malevolent character, just inflicting pain and suffering or allowing pain and suffering to befall.
By the way, if a Christian calls in, I promise I won't be this punchy. Well, should I make that promise? Yeah. I'll promise.
Job, for no reason. That's the charge that Dan makes it.
Yeah. And I wish now that I would have a chance to write my book again and add more on that point. So thank you, Dan, for raising that. I think you're right to raise that. That does seem a very damning verse. And I think Dan says it's the most damning verse in the whole Bible, in fact. Well, for no reason. I think we've got to remember that this is what happened after Satan had come to God, basically saying...
Okay, so this guy admits that's the most damning verse in the whole Bible. And it basically... should I bring that verse up? No, I don't want to bring it up. But basically, the verse says that for no reason, God allowed Satan to torture Job. By the way, all the you flag-waving phony Christians out there that say stuff like, my God would never torture people, then you basically got to throw the book of Job out and say this is just, it's not only is it not historical, but it's not a story that reflects the nature of my God at all. You just got to punt that away because Job was tortured.
That there's no such thing as disinterested goodness, that no one really loves God. They only follow religion for what they can get out of it. And of course, there are people today who see...
Hey, that's a good segue to this one I just played earlier.
They're called extrinsic religious people. They only really follow a religion for what they can get out of it, whereas they can be contrasted between real people of faith who really love God, whatever their circumstances. And Satan was full of cynicism and said, you may declare Job to be a good person, but he only follows you because you put a hedge around him, you protected him. He's not subject to the common lot of mankind, the disasters that befall everyone else. So if you took it all away, he'd curse you to his face. And I think that question of is there anyone who's truly good, who loves God, not because of what they get out of it, but because they are a good person? I think this is a valid question, which
I have not heard any answer to Dan Barker yet. How is this God not a malevolent schmuck if this story reflects anything to do with his nature or if it's historical? How do you get around this? Still waiting for an answer, Mr. Kuhrt.
the book looks at. And when and the first time round, Satan was given permission by God to wipe out all of Job's wealth and family. At that point, his own health hadn't been attacked, and Satan wanted more. He said, well, yeah, you've got rid of his family and his wealth, but actually he'll really hate you if you take away his health. And God says, well, you've incited me first time round for
he's filibustering right now. He's just retelling the story. Christians who read their Bible and ex-Christians like myself who read their Bible, we know the story. We want to know how you still worship a God like this if you think it's true.
About getting something in return. I mean, the other possible meaning to no good reason is actually to no avail, because God had allowed Satan to take away Job's wealth and family, but yet he had refused to curse God. So God won the first round with.
God won the first round. He's admitting that this is a big game. It's like Satan in one corner, Yahweh on the other corner. Hey, Satan, what color trunks did you wear when this happened? Was it red with black trim or black with red trim? Oh, it's like the orangey red, like the movie Cars, like Lightning McQueen type shorts. Yeah, you like that movie, right? Yeah. Satan loves Cars 1 and 2.
Satan, in that despite all the terrible things that had happened to Job, all the disasters, he refused to curse God and said, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Should I be fickle just because I've had disasters? Does that mean that I should then reject God? No, it doesn't. So
okay.
I think that's what.
Let's pass it back to Dan for a couple of minutes, and we'll try and get before we go.
You should reject God for torturing people, if this is a true story, which I don't believe it is. For fun. Satan here said it was for fun, and then in the text itself says no reason. But I guess what now he's saying that no reason verse in is it chapter 1 or chapter 2 of Job? Is it 1 verse 2, 2 verse 3, 2 verse 2, something like that? That doesn't really mean for no reason. There was a reason for it. Yeah, it was to prove a point. So it was a game. It was to win a bet. That was the point.
I'll break another couple of thoughts from both of you.
So I do acknowledge in my book that the book of Job does have some literary value. I mean, it's pretty amazing to think that we have a document from way back then showing people wrestling with these issues. Of course, their mind frame was that everything was God. Everything was by this supernatural power. They could not conceive of any universe without this, everything being controlled by God. And you find that in most religions. You find that in Islam, and you find that in Hinduism as well. But suppose the judge asked the criminal, why did you do this horrible deed? And the criminal says, well, I had no reason. Satan made me do it. What would you think of that person? He said, no reason. Satan made me do this. So God right there is confessing. The question in my book is not, can we find any nuggets in the book? And we can find some poetry in there. You can find some beautiful poetry about ugly topics, obviously. So is what God did in this book, this fictional character, God, was capriciously malevolent. He killed Job's 10 children. They were adult children. And by the way, Martin makes a point of trying to find shadows of the resurrection in the book of Job by saying, well, he restored 10 children to him. But those weren't the same 10 kids. You don't seem to find any remorse from Job over the loss.
Yeah, this is a good point by Dan Barker. It's like Christians desperately try to find some foreshadowing in the Old Testament to say, well, this is a literary device. But they're still left with answering the question, do you believe this reflects the nature of your God? Do you believe this actually happened in history? Answer those questions. And I tell you, if you answer yes to either one of those two, what is wrong with you? What is on that scale of benefit that's so strong, meaning and purpose, that offsets that garbage, that you would believe it?
Of his children, because in those days, children and cattle and wives and possessions were a measure of a man's.
You notice what he did there? Children, cattle, and wives are possessions. He's right. Women, if you don't believe me, read the 10 Commandments. Women are right alongside cattle, oxen, and asses. Asses?
Status and
as possessions that you should not covet.
Wealth, and that's how Job was described. And so the fact that later somehow this old wife of his, who already had 10 grown children, somehow got 10 more children, and Job was happy about that. Did he not mourn the fact that God had murdered his first children? So the book of Job, regardless of any truths you might find in there, really does.
See, a lot of Christians are going to push back. God didn't murder Job's children. Satan did. Yeah, it's like saying God gave the bazooka to Satan and said, go ahead, pull the trigger. You can say they're both guilty, but don't absolve God from it if you're a Christian listening and that's what you want to do.
Okay.
Court Dawkins claim that God is capriciously malevolent.
Quick response. We'll go to our first break.
Well, I think that the book of Job shows that actually we don't live in a dualistic universe where there's equal opposite powers of good and evil and where God and Satan slog it out for eternity. So I don't think anyone can say the devil made me do it. I think that's false. I think that ultimately God is sovereign, and that we can trust that if there is innocent suffering, which there is in the world.
See, it sounds to me like this Kuhrt guy just doesn't believe it's history, and he doesn't believe it even paints a picture of who his God is. So basically he's just denying the text. He said, well, that's what it says, but that's not what it means. That's a very famous apologetic when it comes to Old Testament atrocities.
Then God can bring good out of that. Of course, the ultimate example is the innocent suffering of Christ on the cross. And Job is a type of Christ. He's an example of someone who suffered innocently, that the book consistently defends the fact that Job was a righteous person. The three friends that supposedly comfort him don't factor that into their pastoral advice, and they end up making him more miserable and doing what they shouldn't do because they assume that Job must...
See, Dan Barker should pounce on this guy, not literally, and basically force him in a corner to say, do you believe that it would be bad if God actually did what the text says he did? Do you think it's bad for a father to let a serial killer into his home and say, do what you want, have fun? In fact, do bad things to my family, have fun. Do you think that's a bad thing? Do you think that's what God did in Job? Do you condone it? Or are you repulsed by it and you say, no, that doesn't reflect anything? Force this guy to basically say, yeah, there's good nuggets in Job, whatever, poetry, blah, 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 maybe some foreshadowing in Jesus. But yeah, this whole concept is false. My God is not like that. Force him to say that. Force them to say, no, this is just a story, never happened in history. Force these Christians to say that. Force them to, time and time again, reject their own scriptures historically. Because it'd be much easier than later when you're talking about the resurrection.
Deserve it. And the book of Job says no. In the end, Job was vindicated, and I think he did mourn for his children. I think he spent many tortuous chapters saying how terrible this whole situation was, and he'd lost everything, and how his heart was breaking. And yes, we see a sort of glimpse of a kind of pictorial being destroyed in my
another
misogyny, hatred of women by men is
okay. So this is a new topic. Is God misogynistic? For people in Louisiana, misogynistic means hater of women,
which was good, and the only thing that wasn't good was that Adam couldn't share it with Eve, and Adam was delighted when Eve was created. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Wow, but same but different. But then of course it all went wrong in Genesis 3, and the fall meant that the relationship between men and women, just like
if I was Dan Barker, force him to commit, do you believe there was a literal Adam and Eve? Yes or no? Lean yes, lean no. Force him to make not a knowledge statement, but a belief statement about that. Force him to say that I believe, Eve was created for Adam, out of his rib. And that women, as it says in the New Testament, I believe, it says in the New Testament, that men are the glory of God, but women are the glory of men. Why? Because men were created first, women were created second from man. From man. That shows you, did Paul say that? Yeah. Paul's basically saying, I believe in a literal Adam and Eve. I believe that Adam was first and Eve was second, and Eve was created from man, but man, was created from God. Now, God did the molding. It's really hard to make a woman just from a rib. So you got to, artistic license, and a little clay here, a little patch there, little foundation up there.
Everything else disintegrated and became disastrous. And so from then on in, misogyny, hatred of women by men is just one of the enormous numbers of evils that afflict the world. And the Bible, of course, simply reports a lot of the evil that goes on, and including misogyny. So we've got to understand that the world that the Bible describes is a world of evil and where terrible things happen to women. And I think one of the things in Dan's book which he suggests is that,
he's painting this picture that the misogyny in the Bible is just a description of real world problems. The Bible is just relaying history as far as this type of sin. But no, it's like there's so many examples of, for example, a marriage. Marriage was a business contract between two men. I've asked the question in the past, and I think one Christian's found one example that but I forget which one it was. But find me an example where a woman had the ability to choose her husband. Anywhere. Bueller? I think there was one, but I forget which one it was. But for the most part, Daddy says, I got to marry Myron. Okay, I'm going to marry Myron because Daddy says, or the guy comes up to the father and says, can I marry, Melissa? You don't ask Melissa if you can marry Melissa. You ask Melissa's daddy. And that tradition still is live and well today.
That God kind of approved of all the terrible things that happen to women, whereas of course he didn't approve at all. And an example in the book of Judges, where Leviticus 19, where a concubine of a Levite is horribly raped, and but the constant refrain in the book is that in those days Israel had no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Yeah, and then there's verses like if you're raped and if the woman doesn't make a sound, doesn't shout like she should for help, then the punishments are not as bad for the raper, and then the rapee has to marry her raper. And because back then, basically, coitus is the definition of marriage back then. Like, do you think they actually had a dress and a tux, and they hire Samuel Jackson to play the piano back in the Old Testament days with a cigarette hanging from his mouth? So, play songs as she comes down the aisle. And no, it's like, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, we're married. Well, after the father says, okay. Or maybe sometimes it was wham, bam, thank you, ma'am first, and then you ask the father.
Because of idolatry and because of wickedness, and they weren't following God's ways at all. They weren't treating women with respect. And
you notice, not treating women with respect, you notice nowhere in the Bible does it say that Solomon had one wife, and is it 399 adulteresses? No, they call them all wives. It's like the Old Testament authors acknowledged by calling all of Solomon's wives wives. The Old Testament is basically saying, yeah, they're wives. They're not just flings, adulteresses. There just isn't one wife and a bunch of sinners. No, they're all wives. The Bible, the Old Testament, could have made that very clear.
And so there were things that grieved the heart.
And are you saying then that
Mike Cortez, you knew where I was going with that. PineCreek for marriage, your thoughts go directly to Kill Bill. I don't know why my thoughts went to Kill Bill when I thought about Old Testament marriage.
Dan, in his book, claims that God endorses these, but you're saying, no, these are simply things being reported. God isn't necessarily at all endorsing this kind of behavior towards women.
Well, not only are they simply being reported, they're actually... for
being
the people to understand that this is horror. This is horrible. And so,
this is sick. This is why, I get accused of being a fundamentalist atheist, but the cherry picking, the outright ignoring what the text says just sickens me. Like, I have to do this? I guess I do. Let's see here. Like, does this guy who was just talking, what's his name? Martin Kuhrt. Does he believe the 10 Commandments even came from God? Does he believe that? Yeah, you must not take your neighbor's house. You must not want his wife, and you must not want his men and women servants or cattle or his donkeys. You must not take anything that belongs to another person. This is a list of things that belongs to a man. Let me repeat that. This is a list of things that, according to the commandments that I think Martin Kuhrt would say came from Yahweh himself, this is a list of things that belong to a man. His wife, his cattle, his servants, his slaves, basically. This is a very nice. Let's get a not so nice translation here. This is the good old King James. Let's see here. Thou shalt not covet. I know it's small. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass. But his ass looks so good. Nor anything that is his neighbor's.
It's like The Color Purple is a film about a black woman who's, abused and raped and, all the rest of it. But the mere fact that it's described and shown is so that there is a voice for the innocent sufferer. And we don't say, that film's terrible because it shows misogynistic.
Thomas Payne says, Job is the best and most explicit story of God's power over evil. He has no power. Interesting.
Treatment of women. We say it's important that the voice is heard. So I'd
be interested in your response to that first, then, Dan, and then I'd like to come to the specific examples of women of less value and so on in the bits that potentially could be described as ordained by God in the Bible. But have you misrepresented, this is the charge, some of these passages as being somehow endorsed by God when they're simply reporting what happened and in fact reported in a very negative light?
Yes, there are many examples of stories reported in the Old Testament, especially, which are describing rather than endorsing. You're right about that. But in this particular case, and by the way, I don't even mention the story of the concubine in my book. I think that's from chapter 19. I think I go into chapter 21 where the Israelites were allowed to go steal the women after a party. But during this whole time, even though this whole thing is bracketed in terms of they didn't have a king at that time, as if having a king would have made things any better, they were in fact in touch with God. There are many cases in those very chapters where they were conferring with God and talking with God, and the actions they were doing were being perceived by those actors as being approved by God. Although,
see, what Dan Barker should say now is, Martin Kuhrt, do you agree with me that God actually said stuff to people and it was recorded in the Old Testament? Do you believe that? Or are you going to be one of these wishy-washy, granola-crunching, tree-hugging, sandal-wearing, no-spine type liberal Christians? It's just all love and anything that makes my God look bad never happened. Anything that makes my God looks good, oh yes, that happened.
we don't have any verses where God said, "Thou shalt do this." These were God's people in God's holy land doing things that were helping those 12 tribes to proceed. And they even go on to show how one of the tribes, I think it was the tribe of Dan, didn't have a place to live. And so God allowed them to invade and conquer and commit a total genocide of a peaceful people. It said they were peaceful people so that they could invade it and take it away, much like what happened with the Europeans who came to my continent with a Bible in one hand and a gun in the other and committed this mass exodus of the tribes. So yeah, you do make a point, Martin, that there are some descriptions in the Bible, but overall...
Yes, JD, don't forget, I got to add that to the list because I always have my list of California liberals. I love California liberals. Some of my best friends are California liberals. But don't forget latte drinking and Prius driving. Actually, we should say Tesla driving, right?
If you look at the big picture and don't just cherry pick a few examples where you do see descriptions rather than endorsements.
Thomas Payne says, PineCreek, invite Justin on your channel. Justin Brierly, come on my channel. If you're listening right now, hop on. See the thing on top of the screen? You can hop on right now, or you can email me at dll1671@yahoo.com. You can come on my channel. I really want to know what Justin thinks of all this, because he's like a nice guy. If he thought for 1 second that this Old Testament stuff is an actual reflection of the nature of his deity, you would think he would let Christianity go. Both these guys, I don't think, buy any of it. What's ironic is the guy who's more true to the text is the atheist. These guys have to say, well, it says it. Yeah, it says it, but it doesn't really mean it. And yeah, it's a poetry, mystery, blah, blah, blah. But this is supposed to be your foundation. Jesus is supposed to come from the Old Testament through prophecy and all these things. And yet you just...
Overall, the whole culture, which those people felt their God was approving, because even in the Ten Commandments, he calls women property. And women are always considered property.
I didn't see. Dan Bark and I think alike.
Property in the Bible. And a man's wealth is determined by how many wives he had, including God's approval of polygamy.
Yeah, so let's go into some of these.
Yeah, I agree. Like, if you want to show how wealthy you are, have lots of wives. Because, unless you all want to live in the same house, you got to have like a house for each wife. And then each wife has their own kids, and shoes are not cheap, and education is not cheap, and healthcare is not cheap. But if you have them all in the same house, then I don't know. You've got like different bedrooms. How does that? For any, is there any Mormon polygamists or Muslim multiple marriage people listening right now? I really want to know how that works. Like, is it like Doris on Mondays, Tammy on Tuesdays, Wendy on Wednesdays, Thordalina on Thursdays, Francesca on Fridays? Oh man, poor Solomon. He needed like close to 3 years worth, and then he wouldn't even get back to the first person.
These examples. Let's do that, and you might want to respond first, but yeah.
Okay, you know what? This is going nowhere because this guy is just going to talk about mystery and poetry and love. Love makes people happy. And so it's like, ugh. I still want a Christian to call in. Feel free to, and talk about the topics like as number one, is God your self-help tool? Is Jesus your self-help tool? What has Jesus done for you lately? That's what's her name? Jackson song? And then you also tell me how you handle. Can you answer better than this guy, this Martin Kuhrt guy, for me? That'd be great if you could. And then lastly, since I have time, I want to talk about Mormonism for a bit. Mormonism is God's gift not only to Jews, but Mormonism is God's gift to atheists. I know that sounds funny, right? Michelle says, I'm not polygamous, but I'm polyamorous. Yeah, I know I know at least one polyamorous person. You know what I like about polyamory? Besides the obvious. I think you have to be more honest in a polyamorous relationship than a monogamous relationship in order for it to work. Like, everybody has to be on the same page, because otherwise it's a mess. But with monogamy, not so much. Okay, but Mormonism is a gift, because listen to how these guys talk about how wrong Mormonism is. And sometimes they're totally oblivious to using that same standard on their own beliefs. So I made a few timestamps here.
And then there are two people groups. There are the Lamanites and the Nephites. Laman was his son. Nephi was his son. They ended up having a disagreement. Lamanites became dark-skinned. The Nephites were the white-skinned people. They had battles back and forth. Long story short, but 421 AD, the Nephites were exterminated by the Lamanites. They were completely destroyed. The last living Nephite was Moroni.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just got distracted from the live stream chat. Michelle Eggleston says, we all live together and we have schedules for who gets to sleep with whom at night, but it's pretty fluid otherwise. I like your choice of wording there. Okay, for a 50-year-old farm boy, who used to be a Christian, fundamentalist Christian for 30 years. You're just kind of like, you're basically describing what I kind of said earlier, like each day of the week is a different.
He's the angel on top of a LDS temple.
Am I blushing?
So the gold, the gold statue there, he's the.
How do you call in? You just type the words you see on top of the screen, and you're in.
One that buried the plates in a hill at the Hill Cumorah in New York that Joseph Smith later supposedly dug up and then translated those plates using this magic seer stone. So the Lamanites are the Native Americans, and so that's how it was always portrayed. Well, the problem is,
what's the problem?
There's no archaeology to help support this.
Okay, there's no archaeological evidence to support this. This Eric Johnson, author, Christian guy says. Here's my problem with that answer. I agree with him, but here's the problem. I hear, when I talk about, why doesn't other first century texts talk about the that area of the Middle East being dark when Jesus died? Why doesn't other texts other historians from that period talk about the curtain torn asunder and dead people coming out of the graves, or even just Jesus doing any miracles? Why don't we have contemporary evidence, historical record for any of that stuff? And you know what I hear from Christians? I often hear from Christians, they tell me, that's an argument from silence, Doug. It's an argument from silence. Now, why couldn't a Mormon say that here?
Well, the problem is, there's no archaeology to help support this. There's not.
Just because there isn't evidence to support this, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. We just haven't found it yet, right? Like, I have this as a, hey, caller, I hear you coming in, but I got this from Inspiring Philosophy. Let's see if it works here.
This is nothing more than an argument from silence.
Yeah, this is nothing more than an argument from silence. Christians, if you're going to use that you got to be consistent. Okay, let's see who we have here.
Historians.
Oh, you got to mute yourself. There you go. Thomas, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? I can't hear you. Maybe I do. I do. Actually, I do now.
How do I turn it off?
I do, but your connection's horrible and you're delayed. Actually, maybe your connection's good and you're just delayed. But why don't you go ahead and tell me, first of all, can I show your face on camera or no?
Yeah, of course. I don't give a shit.
Are you a Christian?
No.
Oh,
but I wondered if you wanted to talk about the need for religion.
Okay.
Because I think I started out with a Hitchens anti-theism, and I kind of think that people need a delusion to be happy.
Okay. I tend to agree with that. I think we all need a myth to be happy, or to get meaning and purpose, or to congeal, solidify groups of people together. They have to have a common goals and common beliefs to solidify. I don't know if it has to be religion, though.
I think I would agree with you that it doesn't have to be supernatural, and not something that especially Western culture lacks is an alternative. I read an interesting article in Quillette the other day about this woman who was totally molested as a child, and she rejected she finally got into college, and it was like a horrible story which I won't get into, but she finally got into college and she was surrounded by SJW stuff where they were saying it's okay to be a victim, but she rejected that, but she found solace in a certain type of church. And that made me thinking, like, where was the alternative? There was nothing for her to search for. And I think that's something that we definitely need to think about in the atheistic side of the world.
Yeah, I just did a live stream with the Street Epistemology group, and I said something similar. I said if religion were to go away quickly, there would be a huge mess on our hands as a society.
Yeah. But speaking a little bit of that, street epistemology annoys the fuck out of me because am I allowed to curse on this thing?
No, I prefer you don't. And if you do,
Okay,
you got to
okay.
whisper it really quietly.
I'm sorry.
I forgive you, my
It
son.
annoys me because oh, thank you. Can I meet you well? I feel like they're using soft hands, and that kind of approach annoys me. That's why I started listening to your channel in the first place, because you were a little more blunt, and I think that is needed. And I think too many people are not doing that. Like everyone's so fragile, and sometimes hard truths
Yeah.
hit resonance with people.
Yeah, we talked about this exact same thing, and if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to watch it. It's Street Epistemology channel, and I was their last guest, and I basically described it as when I'm interviewing theists, I try to build up credit by being nice, whatever. Sometimes I'm not nice, but most of the time I am. But I think you have to spend that credit that you build up at some point. And when I say spend, I mean offend, risk offending. And so, but you always want to keep your balance positive. So you build up the credit, you spend it, but keep it positive so you can still have a conversation. You build up, find points of agreement, say, yes, I agree with you. We're on the same page. And then, but you know what? I think your belief here is stupid. Like, seriously, have you thought about that? And then you drop down, but you build it back up, and you keep that kind of going. And I agree that if you are too nice, if a Christian's too nice to me, it's like, okay, like, get out of my face.
So, yeah, but there's this fine line between understanding human behavior and the backfire effect, and how people accept new truths, and the rigmarole that you have to go through for maybe that to resonate with someone or to penetrate some type of barrier. I understand all of that. But there's also this like new wave that being blunt doesn't mean rude. Being civil doesn't mean being honest. There's a lot of things that people misunderstand. You can be very direct, and doesn't mean that it's a rude thing to do.
Yeah.
And so that's why I don't like SE.
You don't like street epistemology because it seems insincere because it's too nice?
Not that it's too nice, but it seems pandering. It seems I don't like how they quote unquote preach that's the only way to do, and they kind of I joined an atheist group here in Knoxville, so I don't really care if people know where I'm at, Tennessee, and they really support street epistemology, and they don't like anything that's what they would consider aggressive or narrative or militant or anything of that.
Yeah.
And I think there's a place for both to live in the same area, and I don't understand why people reject that.
Yeah, I think it's just hard for some people to constantly be nice. I mean, nice in the sense of make sure your pronouns are properly placed. Like, instead of saying, "Why do you believe this?" you say, help me understand where you're coming from. It's like just the fact that you have to frame it from your point of view and not use a pronoun like you, because people are so fragile that their defensive goes up. But the truth is, a lot of people are like even probably you and me, like we're humans too. Like, I bleed. I don't know about you, but I bleed. And and we all have this propensity to get defensive at times, and for depending on the topic. Like, do you find yourself maybe more pushing back against SE when it comes to religious topics, or would you feel the same way if the topic was, I don't know, vaccinations or something?
No, I think SE is a good strategy. I just don't think it's the only strategy, and that's the pushback.
Okay.
They seem to be like, why aren't you guys doing SE? This is the way to be. I'm like, you know what? Mocking has a place. being aggressive has a place. Calling someone out on their idiocracy has a place.
Yeah. Maybe it's just that group that you go to sometimes, because like Anthony Magnabosco loves me. And, you know, he was one of the, like, he absolutely adores me. And
who doesn't like people from Canada?
And so it's not like he would say, oh, there's only one way to do it. I think Anthony would say, God bless PineCreek for how he does it. You know, it's we all have our different styles and nuances on how to do things. So maybe it's just that group that you're a part of. Maybe you just need to tell them, offend them a little bit, and say, look at this guy PineCreek. You know, he's talking to people and he's being effective, and yet he's not like holding people in his arms and coddling them. And
confrontation is fun, and it's an adrenaline rush. I do, if you have time, to address a question, because one thing that really bothers me, and I can't really understand why, maybe because it's so much more gymnastics involved, that I have more frustration towards the God is love liberal Christian. I think you call them California Christian than the fundamentalist.
Yeah.
And there's this woman on Twitter that I had a conversation with, God is Gray, and she distorts the Bible so much to venerate the Bible still, while also like ignoring all the bullshit.
Yeah, well, that's this Martin Kuhrt guy that I just played. He's the same way. You can just tell. It's like there's this desire for hope, meaning, and purpose from the main core belief system, and so anything else that gets in the way is explained away.
Yeah, I would like to see someone take that approach to like something horrible like Mein Kampf, and just cherry pick the beautiful messages and interpret it in the most charitable way possible.
Hitler was just misunderstood. I mean, like,
exactly. I feel like you could.
Like, Hitler didn't say that. Come on. Like,
that's not what he meant.
Now, Hitler might have allowed some things, but did he do it? No, Hitler's not a bad guy.
Exactly. And I think that's the worst part about the liberal Christian, in my point of view.
Look at all the good Hitler did.
Yeah. He had so many followers.
You know, you just caused me to have this thing demonetized, right?
Oh shit! I'm sorry.
That's all right. I do it for the love, not the money.
Okay, good. Maybe you'll give yourself some PineCreek points, and that will make up for it.
Okay, well, it's nice talking to Thomas. Just in case a Christian wants to hop in, I want to open this up and maybe talk about Mormonism a bit more.
No problem.
Take care.
Thanks for giving me a chance.
Yeah,
later.
No problem. Okay. Is there any Christians who want to come in and talk about these things? Let's see, an hour and a half I've been going. Do I want to talk about Mormonism? Yeah, okay. So we were talking about argument from silence, how Christians selectively use this either in defense of their beliefs or to castigate other people's beliefs, in the case of Mormonism here, as this guy did. And now let me fast forward it. There were some other interesting things.
By the church leaders. It's not a freedom that was given by Joseph Smith himself. It's either, in fact, one leader said, if the Book of Mormon is not true, then we're caught in a false lie. And he's exactly right.
That's powerful.
But the Book of Mormon is crucial. And why do they spend so much time encouraging people to read the Book of Mormon? You don't hear the leaders talking about reading the Bible all the way through, but they encourage them to read the Book of Mormon. And yet, if it's not a historical book and it's just a good feel book that, you know, I can learn how to feel better, then I don't think it's, I'm going to
see, I'm playing this because Mormons do exactly what this Martin Kuhrt guy is doing. They're saying, well, this is not about history. This is about spiritualness of finding God and finding yourself through God and blah, 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 all this stuff. But this Christian guy saying, well, wait a minute, look, if the Book of Mormon is either your foundation or it's not. And this sounds a lot like a lot of conservative Christians. They would say the exact same thing. And so once you have guys like Michael Licona saying, well, whether certain things in the Gospels happen in history or not, that's not that important. It's the gist. But then you have other Christians who just push back hard. No, it's this. Once you start questioning the historicity of this stuff, it becomes a house of cards. Because did Jesus really say that? Did Jesus really go here and do that? Were there even really 12 disciples just because it says that there were? Was there really a tomb? Was there really a garden and Judas, the betrayal and all this sort of thing? And then did Jesus really rise bodily? Once you start plucking those strings of historicity, it's like, I love the mere Christianity type Christians because they will fall on that mere Christianity if they're not careful. Oh, James Fodor? Hi, James.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes. Hey, good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks. I just thought I'd jump by if you're talking about Mormonism, because I don't know if you know, but I'm an ex-Mormon, so
yes,
something that
interests
me.
It just popped in my head. I remember you talking about that. Yeah, so I'm just playing clips of basically Christians not understanding, not realizing that the apologetics they use is used in Mormonism. Is that true?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was a Mormon, I had almost no exposure to apologetics of any sort. It's, at least for me, it wasn't really emphasized. There are, of course, Mormon apologists that I sort of discovered when I started to doubt. But yeah, it's been interesting in the subsequent years that becoming more exposed to apologetics, that I've realized that a lot of the tactics are very similar. Especially looking at Christians defend the New Testament, like the historicity of that, or the Old Testament, and comparing that to how Mormons defend the historicity of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, like what I just played is the argument from silence. Well, yeah, sure, we don't have evidence of these locations or this sort of thing, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Like, do they say stuff like that, similar to what the Christians say?
Yeah, that's exactly what they say. So they'll talk about how, well, the Nephites and Lamanites and all that were only some of the peoples in the Americas. So even if we don't, like, if we find lots of other stuff that doesn't seem to come from the Near East, or that doesn't line up with exactly what the Book of Mormon says, well, it doesn't disprove that it happened. It's like it's pretty much the case that any finding would be consistent with the Book of Mormon, because they'll just say, well, that's something else.
I got a couple of deep questions for you. Why didn't you become a Christian after you left Mormonism?
Well, I have the view that Mormons are Christians. Well, I know a lot of Christians don't agree with that, but to put that aside, so I do think of myself as having been a Christian. But
okay.
Anyway, why didn't I become a non-Mormon Christian? Well, yes, people have asked me that before. From my point of view, the reason I believed in God and like Jesus and so forth was because of the Book of Mormon. Like through that, there's the passage in Moroni, the last book of the Book of Mormon, which says that, like, if you ask God if this is true, and then he'll, if you have genuine intent, he'll reveal it to you. And it's sort of like that's how Mormons are encouraged to develop a belief, like a testimony of the whole thing. It's through the Book of Mormon that Joseph Smith was a real prophet, and then that God and Jesus appeared to him, so that they were, that they are real and so forth. So for me, the whole edifice didn't really make any sense after I lost belief in that the Book of Mormon was like a genuine scripture. So like since then, I've been very interested in Christianity. I've been exploring, but I've just not found a reason. I've not found sufficient reason to come to faith from a different avenue, I guess.
What caused you to lose that sufficient reason for Mormonism?
Yeah, well, I learned about a lot of things that they don't tell you at Sunday school.
Okay, so it was more like factual things.
Yes, although it would be disingenuous for me to say that there weren't more personal factors, but those I don't think would have been sufficient. I felt intellectually stifled in the church because they don't really encourage you to ask. Well, like they want you to ask questions, but only within their only within the narrow range of what you're allowed to discuss. And there's sort of generally like a right answer or a very narrow range of right answers. You're not really supposed to like dig into like how does this make sense, or
but
how
there's
do we fit like.
But my guess is you even have friends who are kind of like you, who had similar questions that you had, but are still Mormon. Am I right?
Yeah. Well, most of the people that I knew in the church stopped talking to me after I left.
Oh.
I do have a few that I'm still in touch with. One of my good friends who was a Mormon also left a few years after I did. I do have one person that I'm in touch with occasionally who's still a Mormon. And yeah, I mean, I think the general idea is that if you just mention these sorts of concerns, or like the historicity stuff in particular about the Book of Mormon or the Book of Abraham or whatever, it just doesn't bother them. It's basically the same experience as me talking to Christians and pointing out issues or potential contradictions or other things with the New Testament or whatever else. It's just like, yeah.
But this is the $1 million question. Why does it bother some people and not others? Like, why did it bother you that you couldn't fit the data in with your beliefs? And other Mormons, they go, oh, who cares? I'm fine.
I wish I had an answer to that.
I don't. Yeah, maybe it's an unanswerable question, but like that's the question I asked myself about why I left Christianity in my mid-30s. Like, because there are people who have some of the same concerns you did when you were in Mormonism, who researched the opposite side as sincerely as they could. And here's the kicker: they're still Mormon. How does that happen? And my theory is, it's because of the web of beliefs we have. Most of it's not due to evidence. It's like your wife's a believer, your family, your job might be having to do with being a Mormon, the community aspect. There's just so much to lose and so little to gain by leaving Mormonism that they just did the cost-benefit analysis and said, I'm staying in it.
Well, that's definitely true for some people. I mean, there are like forums you can go to where there are people there who basically don't believe, but are still like not public about it, or they're still going through the motions. Luckily I found out about all this stuff before I was like married and had children and all that stuff. So I wasn't as nearly as invested as they are, especially people who live in Utah and like everything's all around surrounds the church. But yeah, there are people who don't feel like they can take that step. So, but even if that had been the case, I don't think I would have been able to do that. Even in the last couple of weeks of still going through the motions, I felt really
dirty.
I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it. Yeah, it was just really difficult, and that was even only a short time for me. So I don't think I could have done that.
How old were you when you left?
I was 20.
Okay. And how many years ago was that?
10 years ago now.
Oh, you're 30?
Yes.
Oh man,
getting old.
That's, you look so good because you never drink coffee and alcohol, right?
Well, maybe that's part of it. Yeah, but that's interesting. So I still don't drink. I still don't drink coffee or anything like that. I just I guess when you're brought up that way, I just never felt. I mean, I know not everyone does it that way, but I just never felt a reason to start those things. So in some respects, I still live a Mormon lifestyle in some respects.
Help me. Can you very briefly help me be a better, anti-apologist with Christianity using Mormonism? Is there things that I should be pointing out with Mormonism? Well, let me tell you what I've been pointing out in the past. I'll say things like, okay, Mormons believe that Jesus appeared to Joseph Smith. The Christians I talk to believe that Jesus appeared to Paul. Both would take their word for it, both sets of people.
Yeah.
So if you believe that Jesus appeared to Paul, why don't you believe that Jesus appeared to Joseph Smith? And they tend to say, Christians that I talk to tend to say something like, well, it's obvious that Mormonism is false because of all these other reasons, the Egyptian whatever, or the Joseph Smith was a con man. But we have a testimony. Let's assume Joseph Smith was a rotten human being. The God of the Bible uses rotten human beings. It still could be true that Jesus appeared to Joseph Smith. Why don't you believe that? And then and yet you believe Paul. Why? So that's one thing I use. Is there any other things like that I should be using?
Well, Yeah, I'm increasingly interested in exploring this more. I'm thinking of doing a video or something where I try to draw out the comparisons. But one thing, and I think I may have heard you mention this at some point, but or at least some people mention this, the 3 and the 8 witnesses to the Book of Mormon, I think, are very powerful, because at the start, one of the first pages of every copy of the Book of Mormon, it has their printed statements and their signatures at the bottom of that.
Yes.
People who claim to have seen the gold plates, and well, there's 2 different experiences, so it's slightly different in the 2 different cases. One is more an angel presented the plates, another one is just Joseph Smith showed them and they flipped through it. And the point is that we have their names, we have a date, and we know these people, we can trace them through history, right? So that's like so much better than anything we have for the evidence that Jesus appeared to people in the New Testament. And like it's all the same things. Like, well, it can't be hallucination because you can't have group hallucinations, right? And many of these people
have you seen the video I made on this?
Which one? I've seen some of the sorts of things, but I don't know if I've seen that one.
Well, keep talking. I will see if I can find it here.
Yeah. What was I saying? Yeah, so many of these people suffered persecution. That again we can document, like Joseph Smith was martyred eventually, and many of the others as well. All of the 3 witnesses eventually left the church, so they had disagreements with Joseph Smith, but none of them recanted their testimony. So it seems to me that basically all of the things that Christians like to point to in respect to the appearances of the risen Jesus apply, but like more so with better evidence in the case of Mormonism. And it just seems like I've never met a Christian who's in the slightest bit concerned about this. They're just like, oh, I don't know, they lied or they made it up or it was all confusing or Joseph Smith tricked them or something like that. But then if you say, well, why couldn't any of those things or a combination of those happen in the case of Jesus? And then they'll come up with all of these ad hoc reasons. And I think that it's basically, I'd like to try this more, but I think it's pretty much basically impossible, because there's an infinite number of ad hoc reasons they can come up with. And if you come up with any of those reasons for Mormonism, they'll just say, well, that's ad hoc. Like, what reason do you have for believing that? They'll find objections. But you can never object to all their ad hoc reasons for Christianity, because they're going to always come up with more. So eventually the conversation just ends and they'll feel like, oh, I've still got reasons why I can distinguish the 2. Yeah. So I think it may be useful for not necessarily like the people you're talking to. Like, I don't think you can get a got you out of it, but maybe the people who are listening might be a bit more receptive to realizing, this is some special pleading going on. But in my book, Unreasonable Faith, I have lots of examples of group experiences of miraculous events or religious experiences or whatever. Mormonism is there, but I document heaps of others, many of which are not talked about.
Miracle of the Sun with Catholics.
Yeah. There's a bunch of Catholic ones. There's Hindu ones. There's all sorts there.
But James, you know that's Satan doing this stuff, right?
Well, yeah. So that's one possibility. That's what some people will say, which raises the question as to how you know that it wasn't the case in that the disciples of Jesus saw Satan, or like a demonic experience that was trying to pull people away from the true faith, which would have been like Judaism, and Jesus was a false Messiah, right? So the thing is that whatever the difficulty is assigning an asymmetry. What is it about the claims and the evidences in favor of Jesus' resurrection that can distinguish it from all of the other claims? Because like you can try to explain all the other ones naturalistically, which I would agree with, but then like I think you can also explain the resurrection appearances and other things naturalistically. You can try to explain the other ones through like demonic forces or whatever, but again,
there's a Christian who I telepathically I just heard them. And this Christian said, how James, how can you explain the resurrection naturalistically? I'll give you 60 seconds before I shut you off and dismiss you forever. Go.
All right. Well, the detailed explanation is in my book, but the short version is the tomb was found empty, which I acknowledge not everyone does, but I think it was found empty. One of the women or someone else on the basis of that report had a vision, probably induced by bereavement, of Jesus appearing to them. They told other women / the disciples about it. That induced maybe more people to experience the risen Jesus. That led them to talk about that in the context of the excitement and all of the concern, trying to make sense of what happened. They experienced group religious experience of Jesus appearing to them, whose nature is not necessarily what we have later reported in the Gospels, but they had some experiences which probably fed on themselves, led to more experiences. They talked about it. They tried to work out what was happening. They read the Old Testament. Over the time of cognitive biases, memory distortions played in as well, so the accounts maybe became a bit more impressive, a bit more coherent. These accounts were passed on, developed into a creed, which decades later, then we have some version of these accounts written in the Gospels. Now, I think every stage of that is plausible, and we have reason to think that can happen.
But you know why Christians don't buy that is because they would say that doesn't account for all the evidence, because they basically take the gospel story and what Paul said in the epistles to some extent at face value. Like why?
Yeah, like every detail.
Why aren't you being charitable, James, with the historical text?
Yeah, well, this is interesting because this is sort of like just assuming that everything that Joseph Smith said is accurate, like in every detail. And this is inconsistent with the minimal facts approach. So what I attempt to do is account for the minimal facts, right? If you ask, can I account for all of the details as specified in the Gospels, then the answer is, well, no, but I don't have any reason for believing that those are true. But the thing is that if you believe every detail in the Gospels say that Jesus was God. So why do you need this argument anyway? You just believe that. So the whole thing doesn't really make any sense if that's the avenue.
Yeah, and what you just said is an important point, one I've made myself in the past. Christians listening, if you accept the Gospels and all the text in the New Testament at face value, you don't need no stinking arguments. You don't need to even talk about this stuff. All you have to say is, look, it says Jesus rose from the dead in bodily form. You're done. Like, now, I know you're not done as far as convincing others that the New Testament's reliable and that sort of thing, but for you yourself, you don't have to worry anymore. You're done. You just read it and it says it happened. And if you believe everything the Bible says, you're done. But would you want a Mormon to do that? Would you want a Mormon just to read the Book of Mormon and say, oh, it says this. I'm done. I don't need to listen to you Christians out there, non-Mormon Christians.
Yeah, interestingly, the Book of Mormon doesn't claim to be self-authenticating in the way that some Christians at least will say, I don't know, the Bible is, or Muslims tend to say the Quran is. Well, what the Book of Mormon says is that God will authenticate it in some sort of experiential or personal way, which at least to me makes more sense, because the idea of a self-authenticating text just makes no sense to me.
I have a video called The Minimal Facts Argument is Powerful for Mormonism. And actually, maybe when you get off, I'll play it. But
yeah, sure.
The facts I use, tell me if maybe I should have done different facts. Here's the 4 minimal facts for Mormonism. Now, if you're a Christian who says, but Joseph Smith was a con man, just hear me out, because minimal facts is not maximal facts. You're bringing other facts in. I'm stripping it down just like Habermas does to the minimal facts. So Joseph Smith being a con man is not part of the minimal facts. Number 1, Joseph Smith taught from the beginning that he was translating from the plates. That shows it's not legend, James. From the beginning. Number 2, Joseph Smith's 3 witnesses, Harris, Cowdery, and Whitmer, at the same time saw the angel Moroni and the golden plates. There's no such thing as group hallucinations. So that throws out the hallucination theory. You listening, Christians? Sound familiar? Number 3, Joseph Smith and his followers were willing to suffer and endure martyrdom for their preaching. That shows they're not lying. So we got the hallucination theory out, the conspiracy lying theory out. Number 4, Joseph Smith was an uneducated farm boy who could not have possibly written the Book of Mormon. So that shows that it's not natural in origin, but a miracle, similar to what the Muslims say. But so there's the 4 minimal facts for Mormonism, and the evidence is clear and powerful. And I believe all historians agree on these 4 facts, that these things were reported.
I would tweak 2 slightly. You said that the 3 witnesses saw the angel Moroni. You just said that they reported that they saw the angel Moroni, but that's just right. Clarification. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think that those 4 facts are agreed upon by historians. There's really just no arguing with any of those. And I think that they mirror a minimal facts approach for Christianity quite well. But it's interesting that also this is what Mormons say. Like, this is, although I've never heard a Mormon use the phrase minimal facts approach. Maybe some have, I don't know. But they do argue these facts. They argue that Joseph Smith could never have written the Book of Mormon. And they argue that the 3 witnesses never denied their testimonies, and that it couldn't have been a hallucination because there were 3 of them. And Joseph Smith, always said that he was translating from gold plates. And that, their truthfulness was cemented by the fact that they were willing to suffer and die for it. I would also add, by the way, that a lot of people, atheists and Christians, are pretty willing to just say that Joseph Smith was like a liar and a fraud. I'm actually willing to defend Joseph Smith, at least to some extent, although I believe he was dishonest in some ways, but I don't think it was a out and out fraud. I'm hoping to, at some point with Nathan, get to discussion with some Mormons that we can sort of hash out some of these issues. But for example, if you want to say that Joseph Smith made all this up to get like money and power and women and so on, you really can't argue that he got anything like that for almost 20 years afterwards, until like he was in Nauvoo, and that's when the polygamy stuff started and he was sort of in charge of things. So maybe you can argue then that he got some money and power and whatever, but like for years and years and years, he was just like mocked and ridiculed and kind of basically just a random preacher. Like this is pretty much what the point is. This is what Christians say about like Paul and the disciples and other people like that, that they didn't do it for the money and power, because like what's the evidence that they got for any? But I would say the same thing about Joseph Smith. Like for a long time, there's really no evidence that he really got any of those things. And plus, I think that like, suppose you were going to make up a religion or like commit some fraud to get money and power and influence. Like it just seems Joseph Smith was just really bad at doing that. Like it was just really ineffective. So I actually don't think that's a very good argument.
What do you think happened with Joseph Smith?
Well, I think Joseph Smith believed that what he was doing was from God. But I also believe, and this is some speculation I'll acknowledge, but this, I think it fits the facts better, that Joseph Smith believed that God told him to do certain things that that other people wouldn't understand. And I should think there's precedent for this, that the Mormon church is very deceptive in many ways, but they kind of justify it. Like, well, they wouldn't understand, so you just have to kind of simplify it. So, for example, I think that the 8 witnesses did see plates of metal, like they did experience something real there. I think Joseph Smith made those or got them made somewhere, but was able to justify that to himself somehow. Maybe he thought like, well, they can't see the real ones because they're too sacred or something like that. So God's told me that I need to do this. And I won't say that, but, you know, I don't know exactly, right? But I think he could justify that to himself. The point is, I don't think that he saw what he was doing as deceptive.
Right.
I think for the most part, he believed that he was translating a record and that God was telling him to do things. But for certain things like that, I think that, like there's another case of the polygamy, for example. I forget the first woman that there's records of him having an affair with, essentially in the 1830s, before many of the other ones that came later. Or I think that there's basically evidence that there was just like an extramarital affair, but I think that Joseph Smith kind of justified that to himself by like, oh, like God's revealing this polygamy thing. So because he was never very clear about this. But again, I don't get the sense that it was all a scam from the beginning.
Yeah, and this sounds a little familiar to me with what Camille often says, that the gospel authors really didn't view themselves as lying.
Yes, exactly. I would say the same thing for these sorts of things.
So a gospel author could know that Jesus never rose bodily, but is this like a greater good argument? It's a form of hyperbole, a form of poetic license in order to get people to the greater good of finding the kingdom of heaven or something like that.
So people have a very high ability to justify things. So if I'm sharing a spiritual truth, then I'm conveying the spiritual truth to you, right? The fact that I may say things that in a literal historical sense are not true is kind of not the point, right? I'm conveying the spiritual truth, and that's what matters. And that's what God wants me to do, right? So that's what I believe. And I think that's what Joseph Smith thought, I think. That's possibly what the gospel authors thought. We don't know as much about that, but I think that this is what the Mormon Church still does today with various things that they like for a long time. They covered up the fact that Joseph Smith had multiple wives. They knew that he did. They just thought, well, you know, to talk about that is just it's a stumbling block for people. It gets in the way of the faith. So we'll just downplay that and not really talk about it because what we're trying to do is emphasize the really important spiritual truth, and that's just kind of a stumbling block for people. So we just sort of won't talk about that. And there's a bunch of other examples like this, but Christians do this as well. They do this all the time. Like they say Jesus is God, and they talk about the character of Jesus as revealed in the New Testament, but they don't talk about the character of Jesus as revealed through the genocides commanded apparently by Jesus in the Old Testament. Now, some of them will believe that and defend that if you force it on them, but they don't talk about it. Like they don't use that. Most of them don't use that in their ministry. They don't emphasize this when they're trying to say, oh, well, I know that Jesus was God because the character of Jesus as revealed through the New Testament was so good and all of these things. If they were being honest about that, they would include all of the evidence we have about Jesus' character as far as they believe. But they don't say that, do they? And I think there's lots of things here where they just sort of pick and emphasize things as they want to. I think I've documented where William Lane Craig does this for many of his arguments in my book as another example. So the point is, I don't think I don't see Joseph Smith as being sort of distinct there. I think people are just very easily able to compartmentalize and justify to themselves when they're being like misleading if they think there's some sort of higher good or greater truth that they're trying to convey is probably a good way to say it.
Do you think it's easier to kind of bash down Mormonism compared to non-Mormon Christianity, like the evangelicals, because it's so more new?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I've put forward the argument. All the evidence we really have for Christianity in the first century is Christian propaganda, and I say that just in the literal sense, like it's material designed for a persuasive purpose, and like at least two of the Gospels, I think, explicitly say that. So I don't think that is like.
I have Michael Licona
just
admitting that.
Yeah.
I don't know where I put the clip, but I'm not sure if it's in my hard drive. But yeah, Michael Licona admitted that. Yeah, it's propaganda, but it's true propaganda.
Yeah, propaganda can be true. That's why I'm not. When I say that, I don't mean that it's false. I just mean that that's the slant, that's the perspective we're getting, right? But imagine what we would know about the history of early Mormonism, say the first 2 decades, right, roughly when Joe Smith was around. What would we know about that if all we had were Mormon propaganda, like the official statements of the church? Like that's all we had about it. And I mean, I know kind of what that would look like, because that's sort of what I grew up with, right? For a start, we wouldn't know anything about Joe Smith's multiple wives.
Right.
We wouldn't know about the false translation of the book of the what is it, the papyri for the Book of Abraham, that wouldn't be talked about. Various financial scandals and other things that Joe Smith got into wouldn't be talked about. The fact that he like stared into, translated at least parts of the Book of Mormon by staring into a stone at the bottom of a hat, wouldn't be talked about. The church has opened up a little bit about some of these things recently, because basically the internet's forced them. But the point is that I think we can reconstruct with some reasonable justification what the history would look like and what sort of things wouldn't be included there. And so I think it's perfectly reasonable to make a general inference, by stealing that and other examples, that what we have based on early Christian history is not the full picture, right? This is the picture that I mean, it's not even just the case that we're getting propaganda, but we're getting selected propaganda, because not all the books that were written at that time were preserved. They were selected over the next couple of centuries for the ones that found most favor, that people generally liked the most.
What I've said in the past to some Christians watching is, hey, look, now this is pretend world. This is just pretend, so you're safe. But what if Paul had multiple wives at some point in his life and divorced them all? What if he visited the brothels once in a while, even after he converted to Christianity? If that was in the record, the historical record, would you give up Christianity on a heartbeat? Would you say Paul was a con man, so 1 Corinthians out the window, everything he says is out the window? It's like, I'm very curious to see if they would be consistent like they are with Joseph Smith.
Yeah, well, I don't see any reason why they actually should, because, I mean, God works through, broken, fallen, sinful people, right? So why should we expect that Paul is necessarily going to be? But then that undermines the criticism of Joe Smith, which one of the reasons I don't think it's a good criticism, right? Because although Mormons do kind of really what's the word, puff up Joseph Smith quite a lot, like from the perspective of their theology, I don't actually think that's necessary. Like, you can actually admit that Joseph Smith had a lot of flaws, and the other stuff still follows. Like, what matters from the, like, when they get down to it is, like, is the Book of Mormon true, right? And God can work through, like, broken people.
Yeah. Look at David. The one man that God loved the most in the Bible is King David. And he was a killer, a murderer, an adulterer.
Yeah, so I think that these points are actually kind of red herrings, and I think that Christians really even William Lane Craig argues this. He says that that we don't have competing like burial traditions, or we don't have people arguing against that, like that that saying that Jesus' body was presented. Like, we don't have any records that like, and that they would have done that. They would have presented the body if they'd known where it was. But what I just ask is, what evidence do we have about what anyone who was speaking against Christianity was saying in the first century? We have no evidence of any counter-Christian works, or like works against Christians from the first century. All we have is what a few Christians, like some stuff in Acts and some of the Gospels, they say a few things about what the counter-Christian was saying. But I mean, if you just went and listened to some apologist streams today and listen to their perspective of what atheists say and believe, how accurate would that be, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, maybe there's some good ones, but on the whole, I wouldn't really trust that. And to be fair, I'd probably say the same about some atheist streams, not yours, of course. But the point is that you want to hear from what people have to say about their own views, and we don't have anything of that about anti-Christian voices from the first century. So we have no idea what objections they were raising, or what concerns or contradictions or anything, or scandals or whatever was happening. And I think that we have to be like, an honest seeker would be very open about the fact that there's probably a lot of stuff that we don't know there, and we do have a highly sanitized history. And so, of course, things are going to look a lot better compared to what they do with Mormonism, where, despite its best efforts, the Mormon Church can't hide all of these things. But the early Christian church can, because the basically the ravages of time have eliminated everything that would be nasty. If you look at every other period of Christian history, what do you find? You find corruption, you find scandal, you find violence, you find people arguing with each other. But somehow the first couple of centuries there was none of this. Well, I mean, I think it's clear why. It's because we just don't have any records of that, because none of it lasted.
Yeah. I like to remind, well, Christians like to remind, evangelical Christians like to remind people that Mormonism came around 1,800 years after Christ. And to that I reply, well, Protestants came 1,700 years after Christ.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not quite sure why that would be relevant. I mean, atheists sometimes say, well, Jesus came, thousands of years into human history. That doesn't seem to bother, like he didn't come at the very start. It doesn't seem to bother Christians. Like, well, he could come whenever, couldn't he?
Yeah.
Well, why couldn't God reveal a New Testament of Jesus Christ whenever he wanted? Like, I'm not actually sure. It's an issue of shifting the goalpost. It's an issue of like, well, after the fact, like we know what Mormons claim, so we'll say that can't happen because Mormons claim it. But before the fact, is it clear that couldn't happen? I don't actually know what basis Christians have for saying that. Like, why couldn't God reveal more if he wanted to?
Well, because I think it says in the New Testament somewhere you shouldn't add or subtract from God's word.
Well, it says that in the book of Revelation, right?
Yeah, and it also says in Deuteronomy, I think, as well. So that means the New Testament shouldn't exist.
Which seems to rule out the New Testament, yes. But also, like, Revelation is placed at the end of the New Testament because of, well, I'm not entirely sure what the reason is, but that's a convention. Like, originally, that was just a book, and there were other books as well.
Yeah.
Like, Christians see it as the end of the Bible, but it's really, you should just think of it as placing them next to each other on a table, because that's what it originally was, right? So the idea that you can't add to it just means you can't add to the book of Revelation, because it wasn't part of the other books. So plus, I mean, Revelation is not like a historical book anyway, like it's an apocalyptic work. So it seems really weird to use that as a justification for why God can't reveal anything else.
I think at that point, a Protestant would really love a Roman Catholic and say, well, the early church traditions say that this canon is closed, and so it's closed. And they heard from God in some spiritual way, and so therefore it's closed.
Yeah, well, Mormons say that the church became lost at some point after the end of the first century. And so would reject that tradition, which is interesting because they accept the New Testament. And this is something I didn't know about at the time, that like the New Testament didn't exist in the current form at the end of the first century. It wasn't fully agreed upon and finalized until maybe the 3rd century. But anyway, that's something Mormons have to deal with. But in terms of the Protestants, I don't know how they get around this either, because they don't generally accept church tradition, except because they also accept the New Testament. So if like the early church fathers got it right about what the books of the New Testament were, like, well, when did they get it wrong exactly? And why don't we accept what they say about other things, like the canon being closed and the primacy of the Pope and other things like that? Mormons actually have an in-principle answer to that. They say, well, there was an apostasy and God's priesthood was lost and so on. So like that could be wrong, but I think they at least have a coherent story to say. Whereas when I ask Protestants about this, I often get a lot of confusion, to be honest, because it's like they want to accept part of the early tradition because they want the New Testament. They want to say that they got it right. Because otherwise, well, maybe there are some books in there that shouldn't be in there. Like they just made a mistake, right? If this isn't inspired by God. But if it was inspired by God, then like, why did he stop inspiring it at some point in the early church?
Can you pretend to be a Mormon for the next 3 minutes? Okay, so you're a Mormon now. I'm speed round. So I know a little bit about Mormonism, but I'm just going to ask you some speed round questions. Do you Mormons really believe you become gods, or are you gods? Do you become gods?
No, that's not something that's taught. That's more like there are certain views that are like Mormon pop beliefs, I guess. So that if you ask Mormons, some of them might say that, right? I mean, depending on who you ask. But just because a Mormon says that they believe something doesn't mean that that's actually what the church teaches. Okay.
Do you believe you're going to get your own planet someday after you die?
Well, Mormons believe in eternal progression. So that means that we're not just going to go to heaven and like, sing God's praises for eternity. Mormons believe that after this life, we can, if we go to the highest form of heaven, essentially, we'll be able to continue to progress and become more like God. But we don't necessarily have.
But on your own planet?
Well, again, that's not a specific teaching. We don't necessarily know exactly what's going to look like, but this idea that like each Mormon's going to get their own planet and become a god, like that's not what's taught.
Will you be physical after you die?
Yes. Well, that's important actually. Mormons believe that God has a physical body. like a glorified one, not exactly what we have, but the righteous will be resurrected, and so they'll also have glorified bodies after.
Does Yahweh
at the
have
end
a
of times.
father?
Does Yahweh have a father? Well, not to my understanding, no.
So was Yahweh did Yahweh create everything?
Yeah, that's what Mormons. Yeah, that's what the Mormon Church teaches. Now there is this phrasing that as men, what is it? As men are, God once was. As God is, man may become, or something like that. So that is difficult to understand what that means. One of the prophets said that. I'd have to check which one it was, but there is considerable controversy about how to understand this. And currently, the church and the teaching of the church is that, God is the creator of everything. We can become more like God. We can continue to progress, but we're not going to become God. God is God.
Does it bother you that Joseph Smith had 23 wives?
That one is hard to put myself in the Mormon situation for, because different Mormons will say things about that. I think if I sort of imagine that today, and then I know what I know today and put myself in that situation, I'd probably say in some emotional way, yes. But it doesn't really contradict anything that we know about God's commandments. So that's kind of a me problem, not a God problem.
Is there a hell in Mormonism?
Not in the way that most Christians understand it. So Mormons believe that there are three kingdoms of glory: the celestial, terrestrial, and the telestial kingdoms. And to be like, what we want to do is go to the celestial one. That's like the highest one, right? That's what Mormons hope to get to. Mormons believe that if you're bad and like sinful in this life, you'll go to the lowest one, the telestial kingdom. But the telestial kingdom is still really great. Like, it's still an awesome place. It's still way better than Earth.
It's like it's not nearly as good. It's like a Hilton versus an Encore in Vegas. Okay.
I've never heard it described like that, but
did Yahweh have a wife? Does Yahweh have a wife?
That's something that the church has not been super clear about, but I think the implication from Mormon teaching is that he does. That there's some sort of heavenly mother, but we know almost nothing about that. But because the idea is that marriage is eternal and that's extremely important, there's, I think, a vague implication that God must have some sort of heavenly partner. But I don't know if there's like an official teaching on that. But I think a lot of Mormons believe that. And if I was a Mormon, I think I would believe that he does have like a heavenly wife of some form.
Okay, the next question is the video question. What is this?
Yeah, so those are the temple garments.
What is that though? What are they for?
Well, basically, they represent covenants that Mormons make when they. So Mormons have weekly worship, which is at churches, kind of similar to other Christians, right? But they also have temples, which are special places. You don't go there all the time, and they have special ordinances that are performed there. Rituals, I guess, if you want to say, and Mormons make certain covenants, promises with God when they do those things, and those garments represent some of those promises that Mormons make when they're adults. And so I went through and did those, and I don't wear those anymore, but I still have them. And yeah, so they're made to kind of remind you of those covenants. Obviously, there's a component of like reminding you of the sexual purity aspect of it as well, because you're wearing these as undergarments. But it's not just about that. There's symbology on them as well, like borrowed from the masonries, about like I don't remember all of them. There's like symbols over the breasts and so forth, and then the navel. So they represent promises made to God, essentially.
Are you polytheistic?
Mormons? Well, no. Although people will accuse Mormons of being polytheistic because they believe that God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit are separate personages.
Remember, you got the Mormon hat on. Do you believe in many gods?
No. There's one God. God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit are one Godhead, so they function as one God with one purpose. They're not like different gods who are acting cross purposes or like have their own desires, because they all see with one mind and like with one purpose. So
you're a Trinitarian?
Well, no, confusingly. Although I actually don't think there's really very much difference between the Mormon teaching and the traditional Trinitarian teaching. If you look at the Nicene Creed, there's only one, I think, line in there that Mormons will object to, and that is that God and Jesus are of the same substance. I forget what the Greek word for that is. So Mormons won't agree that they're of the same substance, but they'll say they're united in purpose. So, I mean, what does it matter that they're not of the same substance? I guess some theologians would say that it does, but Mormons don't, because Mormons think that God and Jesus have separate bodies, so they're separate people, but united in purpose.
Does Satan exist?
Yes, Satan is I'm actually not entirely sure how this differs from the Protestant view, but Mormons think that Satan is is a fallen angel. So he was like one of the Mormons believe that everyone pre-existed before this life, right? And a bunch of stuff happened before there. Satan led a rebellion against God, and he drew away a third of God's children with him because he wanted to run a different plan. God had his plan. Satan no, I'm going to force everyone to obey God, take away people's free will. And because he rebelled against God, God cast him down. And all the people who followed him. And so Satan and his followers never got bodies. And so they're like evil spirits, and they tempt people and do bad stuff.
Did you do a missions trip?
Yes, I did.
Did you swim?
Swim?
During a mission trip? Someone asked about swimming pools and mission trips. Oh, baptism maybe? Is baptism in Mormonism a thing?
Yes, Mormons baptized by immersion at the age of 8 for children born to Mormon parents, and at any age if you're a convert.
Is age of 8 the age of accountability in Mormonism?
That's right. So we don't do infant baptism. Mormons really don't like infant baptism.
Do you have to give 10% to the church?
Well, what do you mean by have to?
If in order to keep going to that church in good standing.
Okay, well, I've still got my Mormon hat on here.
Yeah, you're a Mormon here.
Yeah, so Mormons tithe. So that's 10% of income, pre-tax income given to the church to support church activities.
Pre-tax?
I believe that's the teaching, yes. At least that's how I've always understood it.
Pre-tax blessings.
Yes, so you don't have to pay. So you're not going to be kicked out of the church if you don't pay tithing. But what you won't be able to do is go to the temple and participate in the highest ordinances and so forth. So those garments that I mentioned that you showed before, you can only sort of get those and make those covenants if you're paying 10% of your tithing, and you're sort of expected to keep doing that if you remain at the same level of good standing. But you won't be kicked out and won't let you come in if you're not paying tithing. But
have you ever been in that fancy temple in Salt Lake City?
Oh, the Salt Lake City temple. I don't actually think I went in. I did go to Salt Lake. I don't think I went inside because I think it was closed, but I have been there. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I've been there too. My kids loved it. My wife is a Christian, and she was kind of freaked out about it because she thinks it's a cult.
Yeah, that's an interesting word. So cult is not really used in the study of religious movements these days because it's really just a derogatory term. If you ask what's the difference between a religion and a cult, it's very hard to give an answer
popularity
that is meaningful. Well, yes, that is one idea. But I mean, if you want to, so the term that's typically used is emerging religious movements or new religious movements, and Mormonism is certainly newer than a lot of other religious movements, although it's still 2 centuries old. So I guess what I would, Mormons obviously don't accept that they're a cult. They consider themselves a branch of Christianity.
Yeah.
And I don't really know why other Christians don't accept that. Because if you ask, what is it to be a Christian? Presumably it's to believe that Jesus is God and to accept him as your savior and to follow him. Presumably that's the bare minimum to be a Christian, right? I would assume. And Mormons agree with all of that. So why are they not Christians?
Yeah.
Because they don't believe that Jesus is of the same substance as God. Do you think that Paul believed that, or Peter?
Well, keep in mind, a lot of evangelical Protestants don't even think Roman Catholics are Christian.
Yeah, that's true.
I tell you, you got your in groups, and if you're not in that, I wouldn't be surprised if some Calvinists think that some non-Calvinists are not really Christian. If you're a true Calvinist, you would know that. If you're a true Christian, you would know Calvinism is true. But anyhow, I got to run here. But this has been really interesting.
Yeah, no worries. Glad I could shed some light on things. I think, honestly, although I'm quite critical of the church, I think Mormons get an unfair rap in the sort of discourse, basically because the evangelicals and the atheists all like to hate on them.
Actually, I think I've been kind of nice to the Mormons because because I'm using them.
Yeah, maybe that's what I mean as well. I think there is a lot to criticize, but I just think it's easy for Christian evangelicals to sort of look at the mote in someone else's eye, not the beam in your own eye, kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for hopping on. What's the name of your book again? Oh,
Unreasonable Faith.
When did that come out?
I don't. A couple of years ago. I I don't talk about Mormonism there. It's a critique of William Lane Craig's arguments, and some of the stuff in there we talk about with Nathan on the About Apologetics series.
Has he ever addressed you back?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, that's too bad.
Maybe one day. I've got to get a PhD first.
Yeah, although William Lane Craig addressed our friend Paulogia.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah,
and he's dialogued with one of the other people as well. I forget his name. So maybe.
I'm sure
Graham Oppie recommends my book, so I've got that
there
endorsement.
You go. Well, hi, William Lane Craig. I know he watches every episode, so please
sure
respond to James Fodor. How do you say your last name?
Oh, thank you. Fodor. It's Hungarian.
Hungarian. Yeah. Okay.
I'm sure you just you always run out of time to have him on.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thanks for hopping on.
No worries. Thanks.
Bye.
See
ya. Actually, to go out, what should I play here? Yeah, nah, I won't play that. But check out, there's a video called The Minimal Facts Argument is Powerful for Mormonism that I made. And then the other one was, this is for James if he's still listening, and anybody else. Evangelicals Defend the Golden Plates of Mormonism. It's the other one I did. That's the one with, I can play a few seconds of this one.
Introduced at the beginning of every copy of the Book of Mormon are the testimonies of the 3 and 8 witnesses. These 3 witnesses, Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris, wrote that they were shown the plates by an angel, who also attested to them that Joseph Smith translated the book by the gift and power of God.
We have some evidence that the event happened. No one can rationally disagree with that.
It would be easy to...
I loved making this video because basically I used the defense for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I applied that defense from Cameron Bertuzzi and Inspiring Philosophy, and I applied it to Mormonism. And this video actually took me a lot of time. I usually don't spend a lot of time on videos, but this is 5 minutes, 28 seconds long. And I wouldn't be surprised if I spent 3 hours making this video, which for me is a long time. The most time I've ever spent on a video is the first century Mark debacle, where I gathered up a whole bunch of evidence. I think I spent 40 hours on that one. But yeah, this and then the other one I had was the minimal facts one with Michael Licona. He goes through the minimal facts for Jesus, and he had it down to 3. And with Mormonism, I had it to 4. And the thing is, like, you cannot import stuff like Joseph Smith is a con man when you're talking about minimal facts, because we're talking about facts that are minimal. Once you start bringing in other stuff, you're talking about maximal facts. And this is the complaint with the minimal facts of Christianity that guys like me have. Is like, but Michael Licona, there's other stuff that you're not. But Michael Licona says to Doug, well, we're just focusing on what historians agree on. Don't bring me that other stuff. We're talking about mere Christianity, minimal facts, blah, blah, blah. Well, you can do this exact same thing with Mormonism. Anyhow, this brings me hope, meaning, and purpose. Going through the live stream chat here now. Fodor has to get a cartoon avatar for William Lane Craig to respond. Yeah, I agree. So if you came late, I basically talked about I started with these 2 ladies saying that Jesus is a self-help tool, even though they might not put it that way. Then we talked about Dan Barker versus Martin Kuhrt, and Martin Kuhrt basically just denies the historicity of much of the Old Testament. And what was the last thing we did? Oh yeah, we did the a little bit of Sean McDowell conversation with Eric Johnson on Mormonism. And that's what led to James coming on. Doug, do some Twitch streaming and sing Freebird. I've looked at Twitch. Yes, it was a long one, wasn't it, Adam? Didn't feel too long, though. Take care, guys. Hey, JD, you stayed for most of the whole show. 1,000 Pine points to JD Goodwin. Poof. My apologies to Justin Brierley. He was scheduled to come on, but we ran out of time.